Hello and welcome to The Living Legends. My name is Fayyaz Qureishi. In this program, we speak to a medical practitioner who rose from a lowly background and rose to the C-suites of Africa. She has been instrumental in the fight against HIV and AIDS in the country while serving in the public sector. After that, she held various roles in the Red Cross Society, the society in Kenya and Africa, till her departure from the organization in 2023. Our guest on The Living Legends is the former Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross Society, Dr. Asha Mohammed. Dr. Asha, welcome to The Living Legends. It's an extreme privilege and honor to have you here as our guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm privileged as well.
So, let's go going and let us start with your early life and education from basic level to secondary level. Tell us a bit more.
Okay. I was born in Kibra. And so the closest at that particular time was either to go to Kibera Primary School or to Mbagathi. So I started my primary in Mbagathi. Right. Up to around standard 3, and then moved to Langata West Primary School, where I finally did my CPE, which was the standard 7 then. Then went to Moi Girls School, Nairobi. At that time it was called Nairobi Girls, and did my Form 1 to Form 6.
Great. And you were admitted to the University of Nairobi to study a bachelor's degree in dental surgery. Did you have aspirations to go for a bachelor's of medicine and surgery as well?
Not really. I contemplated a little, but in the process I fell in love with public health. So I decided to branch off and do a master's in public health, and I've never left that to date. You never looked back since then? Huh?
No. Now, did the upheavals in the late 80s and 90s affect your studies at the University of Nairobi?
Oh yes, it was quite shall I say, interesting, but also we had a lot of closures that happened at that time. Some of it sometimes quite destructive. Right. So we had to close and go home for some periods of time, come back. I remember actually when I was even doing my public health at the Kenyatta Hospital, we closed for almost a year. So we lost quite a bit of time.
So you lost quite a bit of time?
Yes.
So eventually, how long did it take by the time you finished? You lost about a year or two in the process?
I would say 1.5, because 1 full year at that time, and then the half would be in between, you know, close for a week, close for 2 weeks, yeah.
But with God's grace, you eventually got there.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Now, you got into the practice at a time when there were reforms in the health sector from the structural adjustment programs that were imposed on Kenya. How did this affect the operations of public health facilities then?
It was a challenge, because what it meant is that there was a lot of cuts to be made, both in terms of human resource, but also then the resources to be able to ensure that facilities could run properly. Was also a bit of a problem. But I think on the hindsight as well, to say that with all that, it of course brought a lot of innovation at the same time and integration. Yeah. So I remember for us then it was really key to ensure that we are integrating some of the services so that then you could try to maximize on whatever you have. Okay.
At this point in time, there were huge issues with doctors as well, striking and everything. How did that also affect this whole situation?
I would say for me, my experience was actually this is also the time when the public health aspect also gained momentum, because I think it also brought to fore the fact that we needed to ensure that we had community health systems that could ensure that people, you know, would, you know, live a healthier life, and if they needed to go to the medical facilities, then they already have had some structures that they could go through. So I would say there were a lot of attempts. You also had a lot of civil society organization that started also to push and doing a lot more at community level. Of course, we had all the religious health institutions also scaling up, and so created a space for
like you said,
other
you had
players.
to be innovative and creative at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think religious institutions, NGOs, civil societies, they do play a very big role.
Absolutely.
And of course, helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
Now, you took up the leadership role in Nairobi as the Deputy Provincial Medical Officer and later as the Provincial Coordinator for the AIDS Control Program in Nairobi. Mm-hmm. Now, this was at a time when HIV/AIDS had hit the country really hard. What would you say were the challenges in communicating about this condition and the successes that the country achieved in preventing infections, getting affordable ARV regimes?
First, when I joined the National AIDS Control Council, actually I was in the pioneer group that formed the National AIDS Control Council, because that was the time when the Kenyan government declared HIV a national disaster. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest challenges, of course, was first of all to ensure that the coordination system was actually in place and was effective, to the extent that you have the medical side, but you also had civil society also doing HIV work. You had different ministries also trying to sensitize and to promote. And the National AIDS Control Council was formed then to try and bring all that together and to sort of have this framework. So that was one of the big challenges, to try and bring everyone under that umbrella. Mm-hmm. For example, the Ministry of Health felt that why should we be coordinating under the National AIDS Control Council, because we are the Ministry of Health and this is a health issue. Right. But very clearly, I think from the beginning, the message that HIV/AIDS is not just a health issue. It's an issue that actually cuts across the different sectors, and therefore there was need to involve everyone. The second issue was really the stigma. Stigma in the country was very high at that time, and so that was again an impediment in trying to ensure that first of all people could come out openly and say that they were positive and needed support. The second issue was, even when there were facilities or places where people could go, because of that stigma they would be afraid to actually seek services. So a lot of sensitization, awareness creation had to be done, and reaching out especially to community members and families as well. Even we had families that, of course, were shunning off their people. So because the stigma attached to this whole situation, how difficult was it to get through to people, to make them understand what to do if they did contract the disease, the ARV regimes? How did you manage to get through to them? I think through a concerted effort, like I said, especially then identifying community champions, including community leaders, sensitizing them and making them understand the importance of actually dealing with the issue. I think that made a big difference. So they eventually did open up? They did open up, and we have a lot of examples of how communities even mobilize themselves to ensure that they would take care of the people who were living with HIV. Any example you can give us within that structure that really opened up and you would feel that was a real success at that point in time? Yes, I will take Western Kenya as an example, where communities took this in their hands, because then they realized that they were losing people to the disease, and therefore they needed actually to ensure that apart from getting the for example the ARVs, right, or getting access to the medical facilities, right, what was even more critical was the home-based care. So there was quite a lot that was done where community members themselves volunteered to have their capacity built, to be taught on how to care for their own people, and that made a big difference. There was also the question of even how to support people living with HIV to be able to generate their own livelihoods. So bringing them together, forming groups, and starting small businesses here and there. And I think that made a lot of difference for people. So it actually was a successful model? Yes, it was. I'd say it was. Fantastic. Very difficult period of time then. Now, as we move on, now in 2023, where is the country now in terms of managing HIV, AIDS, and sexually transmitted infections? We have made a lot of progress, I think we have to admit, and we have seen in the last so many years that we've been able to bring down the prevalence rate. Unfortunately, I think last year we saw from the survey that was done that we seemed to have, had a little bit of an increase, which could be attributed to many issues. But there has been a lot of progress. We have had many more players, I would say, in the field. But most importantly, I think, is the lead by people living with HIV themselves. They have played a tremendous role and have really been able to give this response a big push.
I think the mindset has changed. Back then, it was a death sentence, according to people, right? Yeah. Right now, it's a condition.
Yes.
And if you look after yourself, it's a condition you live quite well. Absolutely. As long as the regime is followed.
Absolutely.
So there's been a huge change.
Very much so. Very much so.
It's changed the life of a lot of people in the process. Right. Now, you joined the Red Cross 20 years ago. I would like to take a look at several points on this, but let's start off with, was it a tap on the shoulder or you just applied for the job?
I would say it was both. Because at the time I was working for the National AIDS Control Council, and I was still yearning to really now, make use of my public health background. So I was hoping to find some NGO or some UN organizations that I could actually get into. Right. So it happened that then I bumped into some of my colleagues in the ministry actually who said the Red Cross is looking for a health director. And I said, wow, very interesting. And I had come across the Red Cross before when I was in the provincial medical office during the American embassy bomb blast. Right. And there we had an opportunity to collaborate with them, and I admired how they worked. I admired, what they were doing. So when I had that, I said, okay, interesting, maybe I could try. So I actually applied, I was interviewed, and I was selected.
And also about you as a person.
Yeah.
You wanted to give back to the community. You had this compassion in you, empathy. Yes. And you thought this was one of the directions you would like to go.
Sure.
Excellent. Now, there was donor funding for HIV, AIDS, and malaria in the 2000s, right? Now, how did you optimize your experience in government to get this program going for the Red Cross?
The first thing when I joined the Kenya Red Cross Society, again, because it was really at that time when we were trying to scale up the HIV response, it became the biggest program for the society. We were able to really mobilize partners, mobilize resources, create structures all the way to, at that time, the district levels to ensure then that we had programs that were running across the country. So my experience, because having been an AIDS, provincial AIDS coordinator, came in, quite handy that I was able to coordinate that for the Kenya Red Cross. And I remember at that time, actually, the HIV program made up 60% of the National Society budget.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you would consider that as a success at that point in time?
Yes.
Now, rejuvenating the Red Cross, how did you navigate this point at which the Red Cross had resource gaps, but the society was expected to deliver on its emergency response mandate?
Yeah. I think what was critical was to show the added value. I'll give you a good example. In 2020, when COVID hit our country, we all knew that we would have a very difficult time in trying to mobilize resources because the rest of the world also was experiencing the same, and every nation was trying to keep back the resources to take care of their own people. And therefore, because the Red Cross, especially Kenya Red Cross, gets its largest percentage of resources from other Red Cross societies globally. And at this time, you could imagine, Italy and other, other countries, the pressure was immense. But surprisingly, we actually raised more resources in 2020 than we did in 2019, despite the COVID pandemic. But I believe it's also because that, we were able to demonstrate that we could make a difference in this particular pandemic, because the Red Cross is structured in such a way that it works through community volunteers. And with COVID, as much as we tried to strengthen, of course, on the health side, the facility side, but what was critical about the spread of COVID was really, at community level, how people were preventing. Because the challenge we have sometimes, we say, is that we try to, treat those that have already been infected, but we forget that there are actually many more that have not been infected. So how do we ensure that we keep those ones, away from these health facilities in the first place? Prevention. And that's where then the Red Cross, really, had the strength, because to date we are talking about 260,000 volunteers all over the country. And this is a big, pool of human resource that could go to any part of this country, including even in the northeastern parts where maybe insecurity could be a problem, or in the Rift Valley. So that was something that a lot of our partners saw value in, and therefore, despite having their own challenges back home, they were still able to contribute and make sure that the Red Cross was able to play its role.
And how important is it to have, structures within the country, religious organizations, civil societies, NGOs, to come together as a support structure?
Yeah.
How important is that?
I would say very important and very critical. Again, if we use COVID as an example, this was one time actually for me, when I discussed with some of the partners, I was telling them, for a lot of time, the world has been talking about localization, that we need to empower local actors, we need to give resources to local actors. But of course, implementing it has been done in not really the way we would like it to do. But
so
COVID,
it's a very crucial role that you play with all these partners on the ground.
COVID actually showed that when all the other international organizations and everybody else now closed up and was at home and not moving out, it was the local actors who were still out there taking the risks and still ensuring that people are healthy. Exactly.
I just want to go back to malaria.
Yes.
It's been a huge issue. The mutating forms. It's become resistant over the years. How are we tackling that? Because it seems to be an issue that is still there and possibly getting worse. How are we tackling malaria? It's a very, very serious issue.
I think a lot has been done. We need to also acknowledge that. I think even as we, for example, we have the Global Fund grant that supports Kenya for HIV, malaria, and TB. So a lot of strides, but I think now one of the breakthroughs where Kenya is, of course, one of the countries to pilot this is the issue of the vaccination. And I think this, is really something that we really look forward to see how, communities can actually, get this vaccine.
So there's a vaccination in the process at the moment?
Yes. And, a few countries in Africa that are piloting, and Kenya is one of them. Yeah.
So could the vaccination be the answer?
It will, by, far and large, really help. But of course, again, the question is, it's almost like the COVID story. How many people can we get vaccinated? Because then you need to have a good pool of people to be able to sort of break the transmission in the community. Yeah.
But you feel lots of strides have been made over the years.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
we have tackled it to a reasonable level, but much more could be done.
Absolutely.
Now, disaster management is where the Red Cross focuses on. Now, what are the lessons learned and experiences gained in your career from, for example, the August 1998 bombing in Nairobi, the famine relief efforts in the early 2010s, and the Westgate Mall and the Dusit 2 attacks as well? What lessons have we learned?
Number one, that coordination amongst the different players is critical. Because when a disaster happens, there are many people and many organizations that want to go out there and to respond, and also have the goodwill to respond. But if we do not have a good coordination system, sometimes we can actually do more harm than good. And I think that has really been one of the biggest lessons that we've learned. And As a country, again, many system structures have been put in place, but we still have one last hurdle to go through, and that is the disaster management bill that we really hope will be passed, because within that, the coordination mechanism, the issue of resourcing
will be addressed.
So we really hope that will be done. But in the meantime as well, we have...
So will that be a remedy, you think, eventually?
Of course, it will go a long way. Then the next issue is, of course, you need the people to actually make it happen, because at the end of the day, you can have good frameworks, but you need the human resource. So deploying enough qualified people to actually then make it happen, I think is critical. We've also had some strides as well at the county level, and Kenya Red Cross has been involved in supporting county governments, some of the county governments, to develop their own disaster management bills, because disaster is also a devolved function.
Famine relief.
Yes.
It's been a huge issue. How can that be addressed extensively?
The solution for us is building resilience of communities and looking at the long-term interventions. We have to say we are sure that this is not ending, and it will not end soon because of climate change. So we may even experience worse than we have already done. So which means that we can no longer continue
with the climate change
we
issues.
can no longer continue to just respond. We need to find a longer-term solution. And we know for us, in this part of the world, especially the Horn of Africa, Kenya, the issue of water is critical. So how do we ensure that we actually work to ensure that this is taken care of so that communities can find themselves in a better place?
Do we get our share of the funding? A very direct question.
Unfortunately not, and this is a big debate. We've had some of the big conferences that have taken place. I have attended some of them, like the COP26, COP27. A lot of discussions about, yes, what needs to be done. But this part of the world, again, we say we have contributed very little to the climate change issue, yet we are bearing, the biggest brunt, you would say.
Yes.
And resourcing is a big problem. In the last conference, there was
the culprits are the rest of the world.
There was the discussion about, of course, having a fund, that could support countries to be able to react. But the pledges here and there, but not enough to deal with the issue. Today we have the hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa. Very little is coming through.
Now, what is a legacy you will say will outlive you at the Kenya Red Cross Society, where you were Secretary General until July 2023?
Number one, the Red Cross has been a responder. The Red Cross has been known for being the one that goes out when there's an emergency and helps people, to the extent that our community got to this narrative of when you ask for something, unasema mimi si Red Cross, because it's the Red Cross that's supposed to come and give and what. So for me, once I took over, it also coincided with the development of a new strategy, and the focus now has been to say that the Red Cross, of course, will continue with some of the response to emergencies, especially the large emergencies, but it has to be a facilitator of communities themselves. Because at the end of the day, even when we say we are the first responders as the Red Cross, the truth is it's the communities that are the first responders. When a disaster strikes, before everyone else comes, it is the community that tries to get itself out of that. So the focus on communities, building communities, giving them the knowledge, the skills, the capacity, and the resources to be able to anticipate, to mitigate, and to respond to these emergencies when they happen is really one of the big pushes. So seeing ourselves as a facilitator and ensuring that we are there to support the communities, not to be the one to just respond, but together with communities working
Such
together.
An important point that you have raised.
Yes.
Yeah.
Number two,
because you are the facilitators.
Exactly.
And you will come eventually, but the communities have to be proactive.
Have to be proactive. And I'll give you a good example. In Nairobi, the Red Cross used to respond to almost 3 fire incidences in the informal settlements in a day. But with this kind of approach, we've been able to build capacity in some of these informal settlements, creating what we call the community-based disaster response teams, give them the skills, train them, give them capacity, and today they can manage a lot of some of the fires that happen there without even, the branch or the headquarter coming in. And this is really a good testament that communities can do things for themselves. They just need to be facilitated, they need to be given the resources, but they also need their capacity to be built. Number two for me is the issue of young people. The 260,000 volunteers that I talked about, 80% of them are young people. And therefore, they're a huge human resource for this organization. But when we look at the country again, with more than 70% young people, the focus on young people was something that was really a priority for me. And today, I'm happy to say that the current strategy has 3 pillars, one on disaster management, one on health, and the third one is on youth. That hasn't happened before. And I can see the energy, I can see the creativity of the young people in the organization. I can see, what they are able to do, and by extension, reaching out to other young people in the community. And then the last one, which I will definitely take with me and will always look back, is the question of women empowerment. Women in management, women in governance. Today, I think the Red Cross, especially like in management, we are, I left when we were almost at par, 47-50. So gender parity, you would say, but more importantly, just empowering women, maybe using my own background, believing that when you have more women in the leadership, you have more women on the decision-making tables, many good things will happen.
And a statement that you are an equal to men.
Yes. Not in whatever other aspects we would look at, but in just saying that we can do what men can do, sometimes even better, I would say.
I agree with you. And it's great and an extreme honor for us that you were at the helm of such a prestigious and a great organization like the Red Cross. Now, you still support the community. You're from Kibra, right?
Yes.
The Nubian community. Tell us about the activities that you're involved in to uplift the status of the community through the Hyber Foundation.
So Hyber Foundation was formed, I would say now almost 17 years ago. And the push was really to say that, as professionals from the community, when we look back, we asked ourselves, what can we do for this community? We thought of, okay, we could give money, yes. And I have one of my late brothers, may his soul rest in peace, who really then pushed and said, let's look for a more lasting solution. So in the process of reflecting, we said the biggest issue for us in the Nubian community was the question of education. And I'm a living example of how it wasn't easy to actually get education to get to this level. So we formed Hyber Foundation. So Hyber Foundation is all about academic excellence. And it was about motivating the young people in Kibra to see education as a very important and critical part of their development and embracing it, so encouraging them. So what we started is we started with an annual award ceremony every year where we award our best students in class 8 and also in form 4 to give motivation and also to show the others that, if you do well, then you will be recognized. And it's a public event. Extremely
encouraging. That's very good.
Exactly. But more importantly, a mentorship and a coaching program where then many of us, have a group of young people that we mentor. But more importantly, out of the pool that we supported, we ended up with what is called the Nubian University Students Organization. So Nubian students came together, formed this organization, and what they do, for example, when they're on holidays, they actually go to the mosque and they do a tuition program for the young people to ensure that they also then can succeed. Thirdly, it's also about skills and life skills building. So we do a retreat once in a year where we bring young people, take them even out of Kibra, Kisumu, we've taken them to Ngong, take them to Mombasa, and just take them through what life entails and what are some of the issues that are critical for their success.
Very inspiring. Changing mindsets, breaking all barriers. Well done. Now, a word to those who would like to get into the world you join of medicine and emergency response. They'd like to go into those fields. what would be your advice to them?
Number one, to just tell them that it is a noble profession. It is very fulfilling because there is nothing as satisfying as when you save a life. And so apart from what will come with it, whether it's the money you can make as a medical person, but more importantly, I think there is that gratification.
No value to it, right?
Yes, you can never actually even be paid equal for
Invaluable.
it, but invaluable. But secondly, as well, is just to say that you have to then be prepared to actually work very hard. It requires commitment. It's not easy. During my time, medical school was 5 years, dentistry was 4. Today, it's 6 years for the medical students. So it's a long time. So you need to be focused, you need to be committed for you to then to be able to really do it. But I think we still need, of course, many more people, especially in the emergency medicine sector. So to encourage as many young people out there as possible to actually venture in this space.
People are extremely dedicated.
Yes.
Okay. You received a lot of awards over the years. Any award that's close to your heart, special?
Yes, the one that is special, I would say, is from the Nubian community in East Africa. Mm-hmm. Every year we have a ceremony where the Nubian community in East Africa, because we are also found in Uganda, in Tanzania, and in South Sudan, comes together, of course, to celebrate the culture. We are very good at keeping our culture close, and then more importantly then awarding individuals from the community who have excelled, who have contributed in many ways. So I actually have gotten 2 from this. One was a community service award, and the other one last year was the Lifetime Achievement Award for all the work that I have been doing in the community. And I must say I'm very proud also because I'm the first woman to actually get that award. It has always been given to men.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Congratulations. Well done,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Asha Mohammed.
Thank you.
You know, it's been great speaking to you, and thank you so much
Thank you
for
too.
being a guest on the Living Legends. You're an absolute legend.
Thank you so much.
Asante sana.
Thank you. God
Thank you.
bless. Thank you.
It's been an extreme pleasure speaking to Dr. Asha Mohammed, the former Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross Society. She has given us insights into the world of relief and emergency agencies. Dr. Mohammed has also told us about the efforts put in by the government to manage the HIV and AIDS situation in the country over the last 30 years. She also gives back to the community through the Hyber Foundation. We thank Dr. Asha Mohammed for giving us her time for this episode. Thank you for watching. I am Fayyaz Qureishi.